Hi, I'm Dr. Zach Carton. Today I want to talk about Walk Fulton insoles, some of the most common over-the-counter insoles I get asked about by my patients and online. I want to take you through some of the steps I use to evaluate insoles and also share what these are good for and what they're not good for, because insoles aren't just good or bad, but they're good for certain activities and bad for others. So let's start first by taking them out of the box, and I'll give my initial reactions. So out of the box, we have two Walk Fulton insoles, and I think the most noticeable thing about these compared to everything else you see in the store is that they have cork as the main hard material that's providing the structural support. That is very cool in that it's really light. These insoles are shockingly light, and it also provides good stability. So one of the things that you might see if you take a Dr. Scholl's insole out, for instance, is you hold it up and it will droop with its own weight under gravity. Walk Fulton does not do that. It resists gravity quite well, and they really do hold their shape against even my hands trying to twist and turn them. So we'll get into that a little bit more later. But overall, happy with the cork. Very interesting to see how light they are. Another thing that comes right to the top of mind is the materials that are on top of the cork. There's a thin layer of foam, that's orange piece, and then a top liner that's a piece of fabric cloth that stretches out and provides a little bit of grip and traction. I will tell you exactly how thick the foam is. It is 3 millimeters, which is a pretty sizable amount of foam. Most typical over-the-counter insoles come with 2 millimeters. The 1 millimeter does make a little bit of a difference when I push in. It feels a little bit softer and has a little bit more give than some of the other over-the-counter insoles. One thing that also is quite apparent from first inspection is that the foam overlaps the edge of the cork around, and that there's a little bit of rough material that goes around the insole, meaning that when they file this down or shave it, it's not a perfect process. There's a little bit of manufacturing differences between the two. I think you can see on the right insole, the foam really comes over the first metatarsal area where it doesn't so much here. Will it make a difference in terms of how it feels or functions? No, but it is kind of nice when you buy something in the more expensive price range, the premium price range for over-the-counter insoles, you expect a little bit higher manufacturing quality. So the first thing I want to do when I'm evaluating insoles is look how they sit on the table. I realize my microphone might be in the way, but they do sit flat and there's very little elevation in the heel. I like this, meaning that there's a zero drop heel, because when there's any kind of elevation on the heel bone, it puts more pressure on the forefoot and can cause pain in the toes and metatarsals when walking. So these insoles do a great job maintaining a flat overall plantar surface. Also, immediately apparent is the arch support. There's actually quite nice arch support coming along in the medial area of the insole. If I measure it from the ground up, we get all the way to 2 centimeters. So 2 centimeters of arch support is the highest end of what you'll see from anything over the counter. That's really nice. Great for people with flat feet. It's great for people with flat feet. It's also great for people with high arches that aren't able to support their own weight. This is great for people with flat feet that aren't able to support their own arches, and it's also good for people with high arches that are stuck in a locked position. This can take a little bit of pressure off the medial arch surface. So all in all, pretty impressed so far. I will also just do some of my standard measurements. Oh, actually, before I do some of the more other measurements, I also want to talk about the last thing that's immediately apparent when I'm looking at the insoles. There's a pretty significant heel cup. And unlike some of the heel cups that I see at the cheaper insoles that you might get at the retail pharmacy or drugstore, these are actually structural. So I can't just easily flatten it out with my hands. But in comparison, if you get a Dr. Scholl's, it might have a high heel cup that goes around, but once you put a little bit of pressure, it'll flatten out completely. Not Walk Fultons. This means that if you have ankle instability, any sort of heel pain, you're probably going to be a little bit more supported in these, which is a great sign. So that concludes my initial review and initial inspection of Walk Fulton insoles. Clearly, premium material and quality, premium build, good structural support, nice arches, nice heel cup, just a little bit of concern about the construction quality. In fact, even if I look a little bit closer, it might be hard to see in the camera. There's actually already some fraying of the cork surface in the forefoot. So something to keep in mind. I know from looking at online reviews, they don't tend to last super long, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. So not the best sign when it comes to manufacturing quality. I'm going to start with some of my standard measurements. I already measured the foam at around 3 millimeters. If I measure the whole forefoot, it comes in at around 5.5 millimeters, half a centimeter. And then if I measure the height of the heel cup, we're about 1.6 millimeters, 16 millimeters or 1.6 centimeters. That's quite high, particularly from something over the counter. So already, in terms of over the counter, I'm quite happy with how these have stood up to the initial measurements. The problem that I see repeatedly with Walk Fulton insoles, and something that you might find online too, is the cork material. They claim on the Walk Fulton website that they're essentially custom orthotics because over time your foot presses into the cork and the cork molds to your foot. That's true. They will become custom to your feet over time. The problem is that not all custom orthotics are created equal. When you go to a podiatrist and they make a custom insole for you, they don't simply take a cast of your foot and then put the reverse mold and insole material and ship it back to you. They actually put corrections into the insole to correct for structural abnormalities in your foot, to correct for the way that you walk, to correct for different types of pain that you may be having. None of that is going to happen with Walk Fultons. Everything that's going to compress into the insole is going to preserve whatever structural or pain or gait problems you already have. As a simple example, I always ask my patients to think about people with pronation. That is, people whose ankles roll inward, just like this. So if your ankle rolls inwards, like this, think about where you're going to be pressing more weight into this insole. It's going to be on the inside of the insole. So over time, the inside of the insole is going to be lowered more and more and more and more. Whereas the outside of the insole is going to get less pressure on it because the ankle is rolled in, and therefore the outside will maintain its height. So if your ankles are rolling inward like this, whatever sort of correction the Walk Fultons are going to give initially is eventually going to give way to the way that you walk and the way that your ankles roll inward, and it's actually going to preserve the pronation that you're experiencing, which contributes to all sort of foot, ankle, knee, hip, even low back pain. So that's part of the reason that I always caution people from not using cork insoles, at least in the long term. But I do suspect for certain other things, cork insoles might be very good. So I'll get to that in a little bit. Another thing that I like to test is the hardness of the insole. I have a Shore durometer, so I'll push this in, and it comes in at 39.5, which is kind of in the intermediate high range for something over the counter. It's obviously, the cork is providing a little bit more structure than the gel or foam only material that you get in like a Dr. Scholl's or CVS brand orthotic. That's good because more structure means more ability to control the foot as you're walking, and generally portends well for the durability of an orthotic, even though the cork, of course, reacts to your foot shape over time. Another thing that I like to think about and talk about is how well these will absorb moisture, or how well these will handle moisture and stains and just life as you walk in them. Of course, it doesn't exactly matter in terms of how they function, but things like breathability are important if you're a runner and you don't want any bacterial buildup or weird smells that could not only make the insoles less fun to use, but actually, because this is cork, any bacterial growth can interfere with the material itself. So on the breathability front, these are actually not good at all. If you think about cork, it's a very non-porous material. Water can't go through it. There's a reason that it floats. So for people who are doing really high intensity activity where they expect to be sweating a lot, or they're doing something in high heat, you may want to reconsider or at least think about how you use your Walk Fulton insoles. Additionally, the top layer, because it's this kind of fabric-y material, I suspect it will not do super well at preventing stains. If I would, as opposed to think about a vegan leather lining or leather itself, or even something a little bit more plastic-based. Obviously, the way the orthotics look is not going to be super critical. They live in your shoes. You don't see them every day. or you don't see them while you're walking, but it is like, it adds something. Or you pick up your shoe to put it on, and the first thing you see is a really dirty inside of your shoe. It just doesn't make you feel good, and I do think the emotional aspect of what you're wearing does have a contribution into how you feel and move, so just something to keep in mind. The stain resistance of these are quite low. So if you're wearing socks with different colored dyes in them, or you're walking around in socks that get dirty and then step onto your insoles, they're going to retain that stain, and it may be annoying to look at after time. On the other hand, because the cork is so water resistant, they probably do quite well washing with soap and water, and you're not risking damaging or destroying the integrity of these insoles. So something that's totally okay to do and to incorporate into your daily routine. So the next test I want to do with these insoles is the bend test. I already talked about if you hold up the insole and see if it bends against gravity, you're not going to be dealing with a super structurally intact and secure insole. These do a great job resisting gravity's bend. If I use force, they do a great job preventing bending on the lateral line of symmetry, which is great. That's going to tell you that if you have ankle pronation and supination issues, these will do a good job supporting you, at least in the short term, before the cork sinks into whatever way your ankle naturally rolls. So in the short term, people with ankle pronation, supination, great. Long term, very risky and can actually lead to injury. That's just the nature of these insoles. They're very good in the early term. They don't do so well in the long term. When it comes to the horizontal bend, they're a little bit more flexible here. I am able to, when I flex them in this direction, the arch does collapse and expand a little bit. And this is just classic of over-the-counter insoles. They're just not able to resist bending all that well in the horizontal direction without a really hard piece of plastic or more structurally secure or more structurally integral material that you see in the custom orthotic space. That is okay, but if you have issues with flat-footedness, you may experience a little bit of discomfort, particularly if you're running from heel to toe. If you're a toe runner, the arch support doesn't matter so much, but if you're a jogger that lands on your heel and pushes forward, you are going to get some flattening of the arch support, which is okay. It just depends on what level of pain you're dealing with going into using these insoles and what you're okay with dealing once you're wearing them. So that concludes the bend test. I also do a twist test to see how it resists torsion. I would say this is good for over-the-counter insoles, not very good from something that is custom, that has more of a plastic firm base. These do twist quite a bit. If you're able to do anything to an insole with your hand, just imagine what your full body weight is going to do. So if you're doing sports where you're doing a lot of lateral movements, think tennis, soccer, basketball, court sports, these are going to accommodate the twisting and bending, but if that's where your pain is arising from, it is something for concern. At a high level, who do I think is right for Walk Fulton insoles? Well, it goes back to the cork material. I think people with point pain in their feet are right for Walk Fulton insoles, and let me explain why. Suppose you have really severe pain under your big toe, somebody with bunion pain. What happens when you have bunion pain? Well, you tend to walk more on the outside of your foot and away from your big toe. So your foot is going to compress more in those areas where you're used to walking, in a sense, alleviate pressure from the big toe. Walk Fulton will trap your foot in a way that perpetually decreases pressure on any pain point areas. Same for the heel. If you have heel pain, you tend to put more pressure on the forefoot, the balls of your feet, the arch and midfoot of your foot, and less on the heel. Over time, that's going to bake in, and the arch and the forefoot will decrease in its height, and the heel will maintain its overall height, causing a little bit of a drop. So it won't be zero drop anymore, it'll probably be a couple millimeters, but in effect will reduce pressure on the painful areas. So who are the people that have point pain in their feet? Well, obviously people with metatarsalgia, pain in the metatarsals, people who have had perhaps a Liz Frank injury, people who have heel pain, so that could be people who have bruised their calcaneal bone here, or people who have plantar fasciitis. It can help in the short term, both from the stabilization aspect, but also from the actual pressure decompression aspect. Who is this not good for? people with more anatomical problems of their foot, so think people with pronation and supination issues, people who have really high arches obviously are not going to be supported by these insoles, and ultimately people that have injuries already, like knee, ankle, hip, low back injuries. However those injuries transmit force down into your foot is going to be trapped in these insoles, and you're eventually going to exacerbate whatever pain you already have in those contexts. So it's very important to understand that if you have that type of pain, cork insoles may be very good in the short term because of their structural strength and because of the arch and heel cup support they provide. But over time, it will most likely exacerbate the injury, and at best, you'll no longer want to wear the insoles because they're not helping, and it can make your injury worse. And when injuries get worse, that means higher cost of treatment, longer time from doing the things that you love to do. So all bad things that are important to avoid. So overall, these come in the higher price range for something over the counter. They're in that premium zone. Think Superfeet, Power Step, that level of cost. How do they compare with those insoles? I think these compare very well in terms of the material and how they can alleviate pain, especially in the short term. So if you're looking for a short-term fix, I think these are a great option. If you want something that's going to last a lot longer, in my experience, patients that use Superfeet get maybe anywhere from 2 to 3 years of use per pair. From these, I expect more like 6 months of use per pair, or at least 6 months of effective use. So it's going to be important to compare and contrast what's going to be effective time usage with these insoles versus how long they may last in terms of overall structure, but not so effective in terms of how they're actually helping your foot support itself. The last thing that I will mention is because there's 3 materials glued together, over time, especially if you're doing high intensity stop and start lateral movement kind of sports, you will begin to pull away at the glue between these layers. It's something that I've seen online where, especially in the forefoot, it tends to separate. That probably doesn't matter too much. I don't see any problem with using a little bit of super glue to glue it back together, but it does pose a little bit of an increased injury risk, and of course can hurt your performance if you're losing traction where you need it. So the last thing to keep in mind. Overall, if I were to give these insoles an overall rating for all possible insoles you could possibly buy, I'd say these are in 5 to 6 range. For something over the counter, I'd give them a little higher, maybe the 7 to 8 range. If you've already bought these, I think great, give them a try. If they work for you, all the better. If you are going to buy insoles for the first time, or you're not quite sure what to buy, I would be willing to give these a shot, see if they work, but there's probably other options out there that may work a little bit better for you, depending on what type of pain or conditions you are suffering from. So just something to keep in mind. That concludes my review of Walk Fulton insoles. Thank you so much for your time, and as always, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. Thank you.